Good evening and welcome to Biz in Focus. I'm Zeenat Musafir. Joining us this evening is Anita Varusavitarana, Research Analyst at the Advocata Institute. Good evening, Anita.
Good evening, Zeenat.
So, Anita, when we met a few weeks ago to speak of the pension crisis, we said that the pension anomalies will be rectified by the first week of July. And we at Newsfirst, we spoke to the Ministry of Finance, and the media spokesman mentioned that these anomalies, those who have not received these amendments, will get with arrears from the first week of August onwards.
Right.
So why, could you explain the reason, Anita, the reason as to why this process has delayed?
So Zeenat, basically the pension anomalies are being corrected because in Sri Lanka the government sector pension isn't indexed to inflation. So successive governments step in on occasion and they make these adjustments so that the real value of someone's pension doesn't change drastically over time as inflation increases. And the reason as to why, I mean, this delay is happening and people will be getting their arrears maybe a little later than expected, as I understand, is simply administration of this is quite a difficult task, and it is a time-consuming task, which is why we need to be thinking about bringing in some soft reforms to the pension scheme to kind of smooth this process out, not only for the government but also for the pensioners.
So Anita, when you speak of softer reforms, what exactly do you mean by softer reforms, and what are the softer reform measures that the government can adapt to or implement?
So I think we touched on this briefly in our previous discussion, and when I say soft reforms, I mean the current cohort of people who are working in the government and were hired before 2015 are entitled to this non-contributory pension, and this everyone who has been hired after 2015 currently doesn't have a specified pension, and the idea was that this would be used as an opportunity for the government to put in some pension reforms and make this a much more sustainable system. In terms of soft reforms, it would be difficult to change the pension benefits and also very challenging to implement this because people have been promised a pension, and it politically, ethically, there are all these concerns which are valid. However, there are soft reforms that you can put in which won't drastically affect the benefit that someone gets at the end of the year, at the end of their working career, but it would mean that the process is made a little bit more sustainable for the government and is smoothened out for pensioners. So the easiest two reforms would be, one, to increase the age of retirement. Of course, you wouldn't want to do that for people who are in the older cohort of the government service because they would have planned to retire in their late 50s, and to tell them that no, now you have to work another 5 years is a bit rough. But you can bring in a later retirement age for the younger cohorts. So people who haven't even started thinking about retirement, people who are in their 20s and 30s, then you can implement this because they have enough time to adjust accordingly. Another soft reform that can be done is to simply index pensions to the CPI. This is a standard practice with pension schemes.
And it would definitely be a much easier process as well.
Definitely a much easier process, both for the government, because I mean right now what we see is that the Treasury not only has to pay out these pension, the yearly pension benefit to all retired government servants, but they also need to this year pull out a larger chunk of money to accommodate for these anomalies. And if it was indexed to inflation, then it would simply be a part of the system and that burden wouldn't be on the government.
So Anita, speaking of labour, the labour market in Sri Lanka, the government is planning on unifying labour laws. So what is your take on that? And could you explain this? What do they mean by unifying labour laws as such?
So in my understanding, in Sri Lanka we have a multitude of labour laws. There isn't one single labour law that governs the country. There are instead between 20 to 40 according to news reports. So what what the government is now discussing and is hopefully in the works, and we will hopefully see this being implemented, is to unify all of these laws and bring them all under one labor law. And in the process of doing that, these labor laws will be evaluated, and there's talk of some amendments being introduced, notably to increase the retirement age and to address things like making it easier for people to hire part-time workers, to incorporate flexible working hours into someone's contract. These kind of adjustments to bring our labor laws kind of into the 21st century and to accommodate changing practices of work, and also hopefully to get more women into the workforce.
So basically, these labor laws, or the unifying of labor laws, will definitely bring more benefits.
Potential for a lot of benefits to come through this change. Based on what spokespersons from the government have been saying in recent reports, is that they are talking about bringing in these amendments, and hopefully we will see them being implemented.
So, Anita, these labor laws, or the amendments, the proposed amendments, what sort of benefits would they bring, particularly in terms of female empowerment?
So in terms of female empowerment, it would basically be in making it easier for women to enter the workforce. You can't address the problem of our low female labor force participation without looking at the care burden that women have. And given that care burden, and given that it's going to take a lot of cultural and societal change for this care burden to be split equally among genders, and that's a very long-term process that we should be working towards. Amending labor laws so that it's easier for women to take up part-time work and to work flexible hours, maybe work from home, is a step in the right direction, because it would mean that more women can enter formal employment and reap the benefits and stability that come with formal employment, but also still manage this their care responsibilities, care burden.
These proposed amendments to the labor laws, how will it impact the current pension system?
So it's essentially a great opportunity for the government to bring in pension reform. In Budget 2019, it promised a national pension system, and if this is to be implemented, given that there is discussion and work hopefully ongoing on unifying labor laws, it would be ideal for these two reforms to work together and in tandem, and for them to make sure that the labor law is being changed in a way that would complement pension reform as well. So for example, the soft reform that I mentioned, increasing retirement age, that has to happen through labor law, and now there's talk of that happening, which is great. And similarly, that if there's flexible part-time work, then you would be bringing more people into the labor force, mainly hopefully women, that would address the problem that Sri Lanka will be facing and is currently facing to a slight extent, which is the feminization of old age, where we're going to have a large cohort of women who will be in there, who will be elderly and will not have income source to sustain this period of old age. And if you have flexible working hours and you give women a window of opportunity to enter into the workforce and incentivize them to enter the workforce, then you would also be giving them this a sense of agency, this ability to earn and also save money and plan for their future. Whereas right now, when you have such low female labor force participation, that option is simply not available at all. And when all of these other factors are taken into consideration and these other systems are also put into place to enable people in the country to have a more productive lifetime and to also be able to have a sense of responsibility for their own old age, then you can think about pension reform to complement that, which is why, if the government is to implement this national pension scheme, it should be working in it. This is a great window of opportunity to work with the proposed labor reforms and to also push this pension reform.
Thank you, Anita, for joining us this evening, and do stay tuned for more of the latest updates on Biz in Focus.
The central bank reduced its growth forecast for Sri Lanka this year to 3%. Governor of the central bank, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, made the following remarks during the 4th Monetary Policy Review press briefing last week.
So as you know, it was projected to be 4% at the beginning of the year. So exposed the Easter bombings, we've revised it down to about 3%.
The standing deposit facility rate remains unchanged at 7.50%. The standing lending facility rate is at 8.50%, and the statutory reserve ratio is at 5%. Real GDP growth for Q1 2019 registered 3.7%, following a growth of 1.8% in Q4 of 2018. Growth was supported by an expansion in all three sectors. Agriculture activities grew by 5.5%, with the support of oleaginous fruits and animal production largely. The industry sector recorded a growth of 3%, supported mainly by the recovery in construction activities. Services activities recorded a growth of 4.1%, largely driven by financial services and wholesale and retail trade. With GNI per capita of US dollars 4,060, Sri Lanka is reclassified as an upper middle income country by the World Bank. Headline inflation remained broadly around the mid-single digit level thus far in 2019. Headline inflation based on CCPI on a year-on-year basis decelerated to 3.8% in June from 5% in May. Headline inflation declined in June due to a deceleration in both food and non-food inflation during the month. Although some price pressures could emerge in the near term, inflation is projected to remain well anchored in the desired 4 to 6% range in the medium term, supported by appropriate monetary policy measures. During the first 4 months of 2019, exports increased by 4.5% to US dollars 3.95 billion. Imports declined by 17.4% to US dollars 6.4 billion. The trade deficit narrowed notably by US dollars 1.5 billion to US dollars 2.5 billion from US dollars 3.98 billion during the corresponding period of 2018.
Meanwhile, the governor also said that the government may incur additional losses due to the decline in hydropower generation due to the prevailing dry weather condition in the country.
On the drought, it's probably still too early to tell. One of the positive things is that we had a good Maha and a pretty good Yala before that. So there have been two fairly good cultivation seasons as far as agriculture is concerned. But I don't think we are fully aware yet of the full effects of the drought on agriculture. But certainly when it comes to power, at the moment, the hydropower generation, I think, is down to about 10-15%. How much? 13%. Is down to 13%. And in a good year, it accounts for somewhere between 30-35%, right? About a third, about a third of it can come from hydro, but it's down to 13. And reservoir levels are also relatively low. So that is where, hopefully oil prices will stay down. The dynamics of the oil market have changed. There's been a little bit of an uptick recently because of these geopolitical tensions and the storm in the Mexican Gulf. But I think the U.S. is about to become, or has just become, a net exporter. That is a dramatic structural change in the global energy markets, all because of shale. And there is still tremendous potential to scale up shale production. So while OPEC plus Russia have extended their agreement, which will probably have a threshold, lower threshold on oil prices, I don't see oil prices spiking. So the price side is okay, should be okay, because I think we programmed on the basis of an average oil price of $74 US per barrel for this year. So we are below that. But we may have to import more oil than we anticipated. So though the price effect is positive, the amount of oil we have to import may be greater because of the drought.
Central bank data revealed that tourist arrivals in June this year amounted to 63,072, while earnings from tourism amounted to $118.4 million, approximately 20.9 billion rupees. This year's tourist arrivals reported a decline of more than 50% when compared with tourism arrivals in June last year. Speaking exclusively to Newsfirst, Chairman of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority Johan Jayaratne said Sri Lanka's tourism arrivals had recovered to a daily average of 3,500 in the first week of July. He added that tourist arrivals in July is expected to top 100,000, while a massive recovery in the tourism industry is expected during the coming months, particularly between September and December.
Manufacturing activities expanded at a higher rate in June 2019, recording an index value of 53.9, which is an increase of 3.2 index points compared to May 2019. This expansion in manufacturing PMI is mainly attributable to the significant recovery in employment, especially in manufacturing of food and beverages and textiles and wearing apparel sectors from the lower employment availability experienced after April. Expansion in new orders and production, particularly in manufacturing of food and beverages sector, also contributed to the improvement of PMI in June 2019. Services sector recovered in June 2019 from its lowest level recorded in May 2019. The recovery in services activities is mainly attributable to expansion in new businesses and business activity and expectations for activity. New business activities of wholesale and retail trade and transportation subsectors, which deteriorated after April, expanded in June 2019. Further, respondents in accommodation, food and beverage, and other personal services subsectors, which largely depended on tourist arrivals in the country, highlighted that business activities were gradually picking up. Expectations for activity were also increased in June 2019 after declining for 2 consecutive months.
Growth in export-reliant Singapore suffered a surprise sharp contraction in the second quarter, official data showed last week, sending a stark warning that US-China trade tensions are hurting the global economy. The city's gross domestic product shrank an annualized 3.4%, sharply down from 3.8% growth in the first 3 months of the year and well off forecasts of a slight expansion. On a year-on-year basis, it expanded just 0.1%, the Trade Ministry of Singapore said, marking the slowest rate since the global financial crisis in 2009. With its heavy dependence on foreign trade, Singapore is often seen as an indicator of the global economy's health. The key manufacturing sector was hard hit, contracting 3.8% year-on-year compared with a 0.4% decline in the previous quarter. The data added to concerns about a slowdown in the export sector. Non-oil domestic exports plunged in May by the most since February 2013, driven by heavy falls in the electronics sector. Some analysts are now betting Singapore could slip into a technical recession, 2 straight quarters of economic contraction in 2020. There is also a greater chance that the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the central bank, will ease monetary policy in a bid to support the economy. For the past year, China and the US have been raising tariffs on each other's exports in an increasingly bitter trade war that is weighing on the global economy and markets. There are growing signs of the negative impact across Asia, with factor activity in the region slowing, while data to be released is expected to show China's economy grew at its slowest rate in nearly 3 decades in the second quarter.
And that's a wrap of Biz in Focus. Thank you for watching. Good night.